My background is I spent almost 2 decades as a journalist and a reporter and a broadcast reporter.
Up until this point, I've put almost all of my eggs in the basket of being a self-employed filmmaker working on independent films.
In a nutshell, I create video biographies for families of people they love. 2019, I decided to just go full force into it.
I was really starting to get my own kind of film and video business going.
In 2019, I started a documentary, and I felt like that documentary was taking me into a new space.
I was like, 2020, I'm gonna double my body of work.
My partner is a painter. We both had some big ambitious plans.
Things were on the up and up.
From October to, I would say, March, interest was super strong.
I was kind of like, oh my gosh, for once I have all this active energy, and that comes more rarely for me.
We went to New York City to receive the prestigious Alfred DuPont Award from Columbia University. I look back at those pictures, and we were just shoulder to shoulder, like crammed in this awards room with all these people, and it was just an exhilarating moment.
And then, of course, COVID happens.
I felt like I had all this active energy, but then got told, no, you are gonna stop and you're all gonna stop.
The email started rolling in of cancellations, right? Project cancellation. Oh, we're gonna have to think about it, Dietrich. We're not sure what's happening right now.
People would send emails and they'd be, unnaturally short and curt and, sorry, this is, job's over.
As far as the arena I'm in with legacy video biography production, such a specific niche. When your business is reliant on talking with older people, I mean, what can you do?
Everything I had lined up just vanished almost in an instant.
I lost all my client work. I was applying for a grant, and that got canceled.
I actually quit my job the week before the pandemic hit. The world just sort of imploded in this way, and I felt this rush of uncertainty, like, ooh, maybe I do need this steady paycheck for a few more months.
It was a hard pause for, I'd say, about, a month and a half.
I felt like, do I have a career anymore? Was that the end of, did I have this great run? It's like, is that done? And that was terrifying.
A lot of people, I think, just pivoted to the way we're going to engage now is through digital storytelling.
Our film kind of came out into the world a little before the pandemic hit, and I really feel for a lot of filmmakers that had those big premieres or debuts set March, April, and it all sort of collapsed on them.
I was in post-production, pretty much done editing a short film around like February, March. Super excited after, like a couple of years of working on it to get it out, travel, show it in festivals, and that obviously didn't happen.
My first feature film, The Protectors, that movie premiered at the Twin Cities Film Festival in 2019 in October. And then we were slated to have our mainstream release in April 2020. We couldn't do a theatrical release, long story short.
If you're an independent filmmaker and your only path forward was film festivals and theaters, and then potentially a self-release, or you publish your own DVD or Blu-ray, that path forward has almost completely gone away. These streamers, these conglomerates, they're really narrowing what they're taking in and their support for independent cinema.
I had to use that as an opportunity to do more research and figure out a way to deal with it,
It's been exceptionally hard. In some ways, no one's here to come rescue you or save you. You have to figure it out.
My husband lost his job during the pandemic, and so he started his own business. And so we were two people who had stable, long-standing jobs, and suddenly found ourselves self-employed during a pandemic with our children at home and distance learning. It wasn't like I was in a bustling newsroom anymore where I had people around me or a workplace. And so I really had to seek people out.
The isolation gets really difficult.
It felt very lonely, especially during a pandemic.
That's something I love about filmmaking is a lot of people and relationships that I don't necessarily interact with until we're making a film. That loss was cumulatively harder and harder.
And then on top of that, my mother is a big part of our lives. She lives alone. My dad already passed away. And so my mother was really suffering from a lot of the loneliness. We kept her as part of our pod, but then there was that intense risk of bringing home COVID to her.
My mother, I'm only caretaker for her That was a huge fear.
It was like the grief from losing my dad that I haven't yet processed through, and then thinking of potentially losing my only surviving parent. You just worry that you could have lost a parent, and I have friends that did lose their parents.
Being someone who is still very busy and working and engaging with people, although practicing safety, wearing masks and being as distant as possible, there's still risk in that.
We really closed our circles really tightly in hopes to keep my mom healthy, and that came with a stress of all of its own.
You see the photos of people seeing their loved ones through windows and talking, and that's great, but it's so different than being able to like sit in the room and have a cup of coffee or tea with them or play chess. I know a lot of older folks, and this actually hurts. I know a lot of them are feeling like lonely and isolated, and to me, that hurts so much. I couldn't imagine being an older person right now and just being stuck, alone for a year, right? A whole year by themselves.
Tending relationships and limited capacity to tend to relationships gets scary and hard. It's difficult when we're, also processing a lot of grief and just processing, collectively living in this time.
I couldn't wear all these hats at once. I couldn't be the video producer, the writer, the mother, the parent, the everything.
It's hard to connect with people when we're all depressed. Because it is.
I kind of felt detached from my own experience in a way, because you feel so overwhelmed. Certain systems in your brain start to shut down and you're kind of in a survival mode.
It definitely had an impact on my my health, my energy. I'm probably still in burnout.
I just know that my body feels weary and tired.
Like those moments where you're so tired, but you just like, no, I gotta just go, baby. That's how I feel.
When you're a news reporter, you have to do a story every day. Every day, it's just like output. And then the pandemic was a different output of sorts, where it's just like survival took all your strength.
There were a lot of times where I really just had to just barely pay my rent on time.
Financially, we, hit a brick wall.
I'll say this, I work project to project.
Thank God my wife didn't lose her job, but she was 8 months pregnant, going to work at a hospital during a pandemic. She kept us afloat, and I scrambled.
Unless you have a long-term contract, you are honestly going project to project to project, and that's how you stay afloat. I never necessarily wanted to go back into freelance work, but I found myself having to dip back into that world just to stay alive.
I took on some jobs I never thought I would ever take on. I thought I was above it. I'd graduated beyond it. In normal times, I'd be like, let me match you up with some up-and-coming young person that, needs this work. And I kind of felt selfish, like, yes, I'll take that even if it's $10 an hour or whatever.
Any live events, galas, became live stream videos. And so I got a lot of work doing that.
I couldn't do the thing that I felt most passionate about. And when you have a kid and a mortgage payment, you have to do what you have to do.
Even amidst all of this, I'm still just, my brain's pinging me. What are you gonna do next? How are you gonna shape this into your next project? How are you gonna evolve creatively, personally? How are you gonna grow through this?
One thing I've been really struggling with right now, having a new production company and being an emerging filmmaker, is what work to take for hire and for survival and for paychecks, and what passion projects do I start, and what is that balance and tension between the two?
You gotta know when to prioritize each one. There's the top of your list for passion projects and the top of your list for money projects.
It's a lot to juggle.
There is times of feeling I'm over capacity, and that's hard when I feel like I'm not doing anything.
This year, I felt like all of these ideas and kind of things I had been working towards felt obsolete. They felt irrelevant. The last thing you want to do when the world is in the shape it's in is try to go raise money for some vanity project.
I worried, would my whole business idea fail? And were people expecting great things of me? You know, from my career in journalism, people somewhat know me in the community, and were people watching, and were they, you know, what if this fell on its face? Then who am I now? Do I call myself a filmmaker? Am I a filmmaker?
Who are we when simply not, even regardless of work, like we can't do our routines? Then how this brings up questions of like spiritual questions of like, who am I and what is my existence?
A lot of people had to navigate that.
I felt like my art wasn't accessible, and it made me slightly like resentful. Who am I if I'm not creating? You know, I had that imposter syndrome.
I felt really comforted, affirmed to see other people asking themselves those questions collectively and on a large scale. What is our life worth when we're not defining it by work?
Many people's creation and art is on pause right now. I'm certainly not the only one. Just because I'm not making something this second doesn't mean I'm not an artist. It doesn't mean I'm not a filmmaker.
It's hard to maintain that knowledge because we're constantly getting told like productivity is in relationship to your value, but also, you know, effort is in relationship to value, and effort is in relationship to how much you can make.
I often measure how well I'm doing by my productivity. This year, just inevitably, for many reasons, having to slow down. I'm trying to embrace slow thinking.
The motivation to create and work is there if I also deeply rest and I also like detach from it a little bit.
While I'm called to tell people stories, I allowed myself to think about what if I could do that in a different way. As a lifelong, you know, journalist before I became a filmmaker, it was like I was always on the front lines of every crisis. Whether that was COVID-19 or the murder of George Floyd. I watched a lot of these events unfold as a bystander and not being there to collect and capture and listen and experience, and that was really hard for me. I wanted to be there, but I didn't know how.
I haven't talked about this much, but you know, as a photographer and a filmmaker, my gut reaction, you know, in regards to the uprising was to get out there with a camera. But I felt a lot of conflict as a non-black person of color during an uprising about the murder of a black man. To document what was happening, especially in consideration of the legal implications of documenting evidence. And so I didn't do any photo, video, storytelling during the uprising.
I've often thought about the 17-year-old girl, Darnella Frazier, who took the video of the murder of George Floyd outside Cup Foods. She had brought her younger cousin there to get something. They were on their way to a Memorial Day barbecue. And when the 17-year-old girl saw this unfold, and she got her phone out and pressed record, and I would argue that she is the greatest filmmaker of our time. She is the greatest documentarian of our time because she had the courage and wherewithal to record that moment that changed our world. We all are filmmakers, really, in our own way. We could be. We have our phones in our hand.
You know, anyone can get a camera, hold it up, and, you know, shoot. There's a beauty that is like how do I want to say this? Almost a visual voice that you give to something that's happening.
I think it's forced me to ask more questions. Why am I telling the story? Should someone else be? Is it my story to tell? What's the motivation behind doing it? There's so many stories coming out of the last year that I hope we can see more people have the opportunity to tell them through film.
If we show up to that with that intention and honoring like the capacity of film for healing, I think it's just transformative work that can be done.
I think it's really fascinating to think about how this has been to shift lives in so many ways and inspire different work and hopefully create a stronger world.
I do trust that process is worth going through and that growth, like we bend towards a better way.
There's just going to be a huge proliferation of new art and of, you know, positive seeking art, and I want to be a part of that.